The stapled pages dug into Sarah Williams's palm until her fingers went numb. On the hard wooden bench outside family court, she held the divorce packet so tightly the edges had left faint red grooves in her skin. Emma leaned into her side, small legs swinging above the scuffed linoleum. Her backpack slumped at their feet, a rainbow of crayon drawings spilling from the zipper. "Mom?" Emma whispered, face half buried in Sarah's blazer. "When this is over, is Daddy coming home again?" The question landed heavier than any gavel. Through the narrow pane of glass in the hallway doors, Sarah watched Robert glide through security like the place was his. Dark blue suit tailored to his shoulders, watch winking under the fluorescent lights, he laughed at something his attorney said. Lisa walked a step behind him in a tight black dress, hair curled, heels clicking a smug rhythm on the tiles. Sarah remembered those same heels kicked off under her kitchen table, Lisa curled on her couch, gossiping over takeout and wine while Emma colored on the floor between them. Best friend. Babysitter. Co-conspirator. All the while, slipping into Sarah's husband's bed. Robert didn't look their way now. He didn't have to. He had already made his expectations clear. "Given your lack of income and formal qualifications, Mrs. Williams." The words from his lawyer that morning still scraped down Sarah's spine. The man had said it with a smile, sliding the draft agreement across a polished conference table like it was a favor. $50 a week in child support, he'd announced, as if he were offering a bonus instead of an insult. Very reasonable under the circumstances. $50. For Emma's shoes, meals, school supplies, inhaler refills. $50 after 12 years of marriage. After the graveyard diner shifts so Robert could finish law school. After the nights she'd fallen asleep over his textbooks, quizzing him between coffee refills. After giving up her own acceptance to a community college nursing program because, "We can't both be swamped, babe." Now, he was the one with the suits and the polished shoes and the high-rise office. She was the one on a bench that smelled faintly of bleach and despair. Sarah's assigned attorney sat 2 seats away, scrolling through his phone, tie loosened, a stack of other files balanced on his knee. When she'd asked if the offer was fair, he'd shrugged. Judges like clean dockets. "You contest this, it drags. He's got private counsel. You don't. Sometimes, you take what you can get." What she could get was walking away from the only home Emma had ever known. The mortgage was in Robert's name. So was the car. The savings account had mysteriously drained right after she confronted him about the messages she'd found on his phone. The building had all the warmth of a bank vault. Gray walls, humming lights, voices echoing down the corridor. A pair of teenage boys in oversized hoodies argued quietly with their mother across the hall. A woman in scrubs sat alone, staring at an empty stroller. No one looked as gutted as Sarah felt, but she was sure every passing glance branded her the way she already branded herself: broke, black, abandoned. Another woman who had miscalculated her worth. "Mrs. Williams?" Robert's lawyer appeared in the doorway, tone syrup smooth. He held the settlement papers like a waiter presenting a bill. "We're ready when you are. If you sign now, we can all be finished before lunch." Robert and Lisa stood behind him, framed by the frosted glass. Lisa's arm was threaded through his, manicured nails resting possessively on his sleeve. Robert's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a smirk. Just the look of a man confident he'd win by default. Sarah's throat tightened. $50. One suitcase. A 7-year-old watching every move. Maybe, she thought, it was easier to let them have their victory and focus on survival later. She shifted the pen in her hand, the tip hovering above the first signature line. That was when the sound hit. Not the usual stop-and-go rumble of city traffic, but a low, steady growl that rose above the murmur of voices and the squeak of shoes on linoleum. Conversation around her thinned as if someone had turned down a volume knob. Even the bored security guard by the metal detector glanced toward the front doors. Engines. More than one. Smooth, expensive engines. Sarah turned her head toward the bank of windows overlooking the courthouse steps. A glossy black stretch limousine slid into view, its surface catching the weak morning light and tossing it back in sharp reflections. Two sleek sedans eased in behind it, forming a procession that looked wildly out of place against the chipped concrete and bureaucratic beige of the building. Car doors opened with soft, controlled thunks. Men in dark suits stepped out, moving with the unhurried confidence of people used to having time and rooms wait for them. But they were background. The world seemed to narrow around the woman who stepped out of the limousine itself. She appeared one heel at a time, polished leather touching down on the pavement like she owned it. Silver hair curved in immaculate waves around a composed face. A tailored black jacket and ivory skirt cut clean, precise lines along her frame, a single diamond brooch at her lapel catching the light in a brief, blinding flare. She didn't pause to look around, didn't fumble for directions. She simply started toward the courthouse doors as if every brick had been laid for her convenience. Inside, the shift was instant. The security guard straightened. Conversation stalled mid-sentence. A clerk trailed off halfway through a phone call, eyes drawn toward the entrance. Even Robert's attorney, so smug a moment earlier, hesitated, his attention snagged by the approaching entourage. Through the glass, Sarah saw Robert's posture change. Color drained from his face as recognition slammed into him. Lisa's fingers tightened on his arm hard enough that her knuckles blanched. "Is that?" Lisa's lips shaped the words, but the glass stole the sound. The doors parted, and the woman stepped into the fluorescent hum of the hallway like it was a stage light. Up close, everything about her presence sharpened, the measured stride, the unbothered gaze, the faint, knowing lift at the corner of her mouth. Her eyes swept the corridor once, assessing, then landed directly on Sarah. "Mrs. Sarah Williams?" she asked, voice low and steady. It wasn't really a question. Sarah's name echoed strangely in the hall, hanging between the worn bench and the woman dressed like old money and absolute certainty. Behind the stranger, Robert took an involuntary step back. His lawyer muttered something under his breath. Lisa's expression cracked, confusion bleeding into fear. Sarah clutched the divorce papers a little tighter, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. She had never seen this woman before in her life. But the way the hallway bent around her, the way the people with power suddenly looked very, very small. Whatever was about to happen on that courthouse floor hadn't started with a broken marriage and a cheating husband. It had started years earlier, in a life Sarah barely remembered and a legacy she never knew existed. And to understand why a limousine had come for her on the day she expected to lose everything, you'd have to go back to the girl she used to be, long before she ever became Mrs. Robert Williams. That story began 12 years earlier. If real stories speak to you, subscribe before we continue. That story began 12 years earlier. Back then, Sarah wasn't anyone's ex-wife. She was just Sarah Reed, 22, hair pulled into a hurried bun, sneakers squeaking across the sticky floor of the Sunrise Diner. The lunch rush had been brutal, coffee refills, orders yelled over the hiss of the grill, the bell at the pass window dinging like a fire alarm. Her feet ached. Her apron was dotted with ketchup and grease. The only thing keeping her standing was the folded letter tucked into her back pocket, the words she'd already read so many times she could see them when she blinked. "We are pleased to offer you admission to the nursing program." She hadn't told anyone yet. Not her mother, not the other servers, certainly not the customers snapping their fingers for extra ranch. The only person who would have fully understood, who would have pressed a kiss to her forehead and said, "Of course they did, baby. You were born to heal people," gone. Grandma Ruth had been buried in a simple, sunlit service 2 months earlier. No fancy casket, no long list of mourners, just a few neighbors and the pastor who'd known her since she was a nurse's aide with big ideas and very little patience for fools. Ruth Ellis hadn't left much behind. A well-worn Bible. A jewelry box with a few modest pieces. A check that covered 2 months' rent if Sarah stretched it. And a letter, written in the looping script Sarah used to imitate when she was little. "Our family has a habit of surviving men who don't deserve us. I want more for you than survival, Sarah. I want you to own your life. Your work, your name, your choices. Promise me you'll never shrink yourself for someone else's dream." Sarah had cried over that letter until the ink blurred. Then she'd folded it carefully and tucked it inside the nursing program acceptance. 2 letters. 2 doors opening. All she had to do was walk through. "Order up, table 5, the cook barked. She slid plates onto her arm, burgers, fries, a side salad she knew no one would touch, and hurried toward the booth by the window where a new customer had just slid in. She caught a flash of a navy blazer and stopped herself from smoothing her hair with a sauce-slicked hand. He was younger than most of the lunch crowd, maybe mid-20s. Dark hair, clean shave, eyes the color of strong coffee behind rectangular glasses. His tie was slightly crooked, a law textbook open beside his plate. "Hey," he said, smiling easily. "Sorry, I know I just sat down. You look busy. I can wait." "You and everyone else," she joked, then winced. "I mean, not that I'm ignoring you. She gestured helplessly at the crowded room. He laughed, not the smug kind, but the kind that made a little warmth uncurl in her chest. "I get it. Trust me. I'm usually the one delivering bad news over paperwork." He nodded to the textbook. "Second-year law student. Professional annoyance. That's one way to sell it," she said, scribbling on her pad. "What can I get you, professional annoyance?" "Robert," he corrected, grin crooked now. "Robert Williams. And I'll take whatever you recommend. You look like you know what you're doing." No one ever said that to her. Not and meant it. She brought him the daily special. He left a tip that made her eyebrows climb and, more surprising, a business card with his number written on the back. "Call me when you're not saving the entire diner single-handedly," he'd scribbled. She meant to throw it out. She didn't have time for some students with a charming smile and a crooked tie. She had rent. She had grief. She had a nursing program brochure hidden under her mattress like contraband. She called him anyway. The next few years blurred into a highlight reel. Robert sitting at her tiny kitchen table, papers spread out, explaining torts and contracts while she quizzed him between stove timers. Robert in the front row of her community choir performance, clapping too loudly when she sang a solo. Robert spun her around in the parking lot the day he got his bar exam results, both of them laughing so hard she nearly dropped the cheap champagne bottle. They moved from her cramped apartment into a starter house with mismatched furniture and big dreams. He worked insane hours at a mid-size firm. She picked up extra shifts at the diner, then a receptionist job at a clinic when her back couldn't take the trays anymore. The nursing acceptance letter stayed in her top drawer, edges soft from being handled. Every time she touched it, she heard his voice. "Babe, do you really want to take on student loans when I'm this close to partnership? Let me get settled, then you can go to school and not worry about money at all." He was so earnest about it. So certain. She let herself be convinced. Just for a year. Then another. Then Emma came along, and nursing school became something she'd done, the smart thing, by postponing. "You're the reason I made it," Robert would say, kissing her forehead when she fell asleep waiting for him on the couch. "I'll take care of you and our girl. That's a promise." She believed him. Why wouldn't she? Promises were the currency she'd always trusted. If there were signs, she missed them at first. A few late nights turned into many. A joking comment about how she didn't need her own bank account when "we're a team, babe." Her card was declined at the grocery store while he shrugged it off as a glitch. Then came Lisa. She met Lisa at a firm holiday party, all teeth and champagne and effortless laughter. Lisa had started as a paralegal, worked her way up, Robert said. "Smart, driven, you'll love her." She did, at first. Lisa cooed over Emma's baby photos, brought wine on girls' nights, shared stories of terrible dates and big cases. When she offered to babysit so Sarah could have a night out, it felt like a favor from the universe. "You two are a couple," Lisa had said once, eyes bright. "Like, if you ever break up, I'll stop believing in love." The irony would have been funny if it hadn't hurt so much later. It was a phone buzzing at 2 in the morning that finally slit the illusion. Robert was asleep, mouth slightly open, one arm flung over his face. The screen lit the dark bedroom, vibrating across the nightstand. Sarah reached for it, intending to silence it before it woke Emma across the hall. A message preview glowed up at her. "Can't stop thinking about last night. Next time, no hotel. I want your bed." The contact name was Lindsay. Sarah knew no Lindsay. She knew Lisa, though. And the photo that flashed up with the next message, Lisa's face, too close to the camera, lips parted in a pout, didn't leave much room for doubt. The room tilted. The sound in her ears went strange, like she was underwater. She shook Robert awake, phone in her hand, heart in her throat. The conversation that followed blurred into shouts and denials and half-truths. There were apologies. There were tears. There were promises to fix this, to go to counseling, to make it right. It never really went back, though. Trust, once cracked, doesn't glue together the same way. He became careful with his phone after that. Passwords changed. Work trips increased. Money somehow became tighter, despite his promotions. When she asked questions, he flipped them back on her. You think I'm lying? After everything I've done? By the time she finally walked into the spare bedroom to find suitcases half-packed and a bank statement with transfers she didn't recognize, the part of her that protested had gone quiet. She was tired of arguing with someone who had already left her in every way that mattered. Now, standing in a courthouse hallway with divorce papers in her hand and a stranger in a tailored jacket standing in front of her, that girl from the diner felt like a ghost. Mrs. Williams, the woman repeated, as if Sarah might deny her own name. Yes, Sarah said, voice coming out smaller than she liked. I'm Sarah. The woman's expression softened, just a fraction. My name is Eleanor Thompson. I worked for your grandmother, Ruth Ellis. The name hit her like a hand to the chest. My grandmother's been dead for years, Sarah said automatically. Emma's fingers tightened on her sleeve. I think you have the wrong. I'm quite aware Ruth is gone, Eleanor interrupted gently. Her gaze flicked briefly toward Robert, who was frozen halfway down the hall, Lisa glued to his side. She left very detailed instructions about what I'm to do today. For you, and only you. Sarah blinked. Instructions, for today? Why don't we speak somewhere private? Eleanor glanced at Emma. We can arrange for your daughter to sit with one of my staff. She'll be safe. And entertained. A woman in a soft gray pantsuit stepped forward from behind Eleanor, smiling at Emma. Hi there, Emma. I've got a coloring book and some markers with your name on them. Would you like to come sit with me just over there where we can still see your mom? Emma looked up at Sarah, eyes wide. It's okay, Sarah murmured, crouching so they were eye level. I'll be right back. Promise. Emma searched her face, then nodded, sliding off the bench. The woman took her small hand and led her to a cluster of chairs by the window. Sarah watched until she saw Emma settle, crayons already scattered across a small table. Then she turned back to Eleanor. Is this about the estate? Sarah asked, embarrassed by the hope that edged into her voice. Because my grandmother didn't have one. She left me a check and some jewelry and a great deal more than you realize, Eleanor said. Walk with me. They moved down the corridor, past the stairs and whispers, and through a side door marked, Authorized Personnel Only. Eleanor swiped a temporary badge across a sensor without breaking stride. Inside, the carpet softened, the air cooler. A conference room waited at the end of the hall, blinds partially drawn, a long polished table flanked by leather chairs. On the table lay several thick folders, a slim laptop, and, most startling, a garment bag and sleek makeup case. Sarah stopped in the doorway. I'm sorry, I think there's been some mistake. I'm here for a divorce hearing, not a transformation. Eleanor finished dryly. Sit, Mrs. Williams. Please. Sarah lowered herself into a chair, fingers still curled around the divorce papers. Eleanor sat opposite, opening the top folder with practiced care. Your grandmother, Eleanor began, was not just a nurse's aide who scraped by. Ruth was a strategist. She bought small properties when no one was watching, invested in women-owned businesses when banks wouldn't, and quietly grew what she liked to call freedom money. Sarah frowned. She lived in a walk-up. She drove the same car for 20 years. And she left that walk-up and that car to a cousin who needed them more than you did, Eleanor said. Ruth's true assets were never in her name by the end. They were in a trust. The Emerald Rebirth Trust. She slid a document across the table. Established 27 years ago. Sarah's gaze snapped to the heading. Emerald Rebirth Trust stretched in bold letters, followed by legal paragraphs that blurred under her eyes. You are the primary heir, Eleanor said simply. But there was a condition. The funds were to remain locked until a very specific trigger occurred. Sarah let out a disbelieving laugh. What, like a video game? I don't understand. Eleanor's lips quirked. In a sense, yes. Ruth came from a line of women who were good at surviving bad men. Husbands who drank away paychecks. Partners who forgot about their children. She was determined that the next generation would have something more than survival. Eleanor tapped a paragraph halfway down the page. This clause activates the trust the moment a female descendant files for legal separation or divorce on the grounds of betrayal, infidelity, financial abuse, abandonment. Once the petition is filed and the betrayal documented, the assets transfer into that woman's control. Immediately. Sarah stared at her. The words didn't fit inside her skull. Betrayal. Descendant. Assets. Wait, she said slowly. You're saying, because Robert cheated on me, and I filed for divorce. The trigger fired, Eleanor finished. Yes. Sarah's hand shook as she set the divorce papers down. So what does that mean? A savings account? A trust fund for Emma? It means, Eleanor said, her voice steady, that you now control a diversified portfolio of properties, business holdings, and liquid assets worth just over $38 million. Silence blew through the room like a gust. Sarah laughed again, jagged this time. That's not funny. I am not a humorous woman, Mrs. Williams. Eleanor slid a second folder toward her, this one thinner. Inside were color printouts, property valuations, bank statements, letters bearing her grandmother's signature. At the bottom of one page was a photo of Sarah at 16, hair in braids, laughing on Ruth's porch. The caption beneath read, Primary beneficiary, Sarah Ruth Reed, now Williams. Her middle name. No one outside the family knew her middle name. Her throat closed. Why didn't she tell me? She tried, Eleanor said softly. But every time she thought you might be ready, you were busy holding someone else's life together. When she became ill, we discussed alternatives. She insisted on this clause. My girls only realize how strong they are when a man breaks their heart, she told me. Fine. Let the heartbreak be the key, then. Tears burned Sarah's eyes, hot and sudden. She blinked hard. Robert, he told the court he's broke. That we're drowning in debt. That he can barely pay $50 a week. Yes, Eleanor said. We've seen his filings. We've also seen the accounts he didn't disclose. She tapped the laptop. The trust employs a very efficient investigative team. For the past year, they've been following certain patterns in his behavior. Unexplained withdrawals. Transfers to offshore holdings. Cash funneled through a shell corporation tied to a woman named Lisa Barrett. Sarah's skin went cold. "We'll handle that in the hearing," Eleanor went on. "For now, we need to decide how you want to walk into that courtroom." She nodded toward the garment bag. Sarah swallowed. "I don't understand. Why do I need clothes? Makeup? Can't we just—" "Because," Eleanor said, standing, "your husband has spent months rehearsing a story where you are weak, desperate, and grateful for scraps. What he's about to learn is that stories can change. Optics matter in a courtroom, whether we like it or not." She unzipped the bag with a soft hiss. Emerald green spilled out, silk and sequins and something that caught the light like water. A gown, floor-length but clean-lined, elegant rather than fussy. Beside it, a matching pair of heels and a structured jacket with a subtle sheen. Sarah stared. "I can't wear that. I'll look ridiculous. Everyone will think." "Everyone will think exactly what your grandmother intended," Eleanor interrupted. "They'll see a woman who is not begging for mercy but choosing her terms. A woman who is not walking alone, but backed by an empire she didn't even know she belonged to." Her tone softened. "It matters, Sarah. Not because money makes you better, but because he thinks it does. Let him see what happens when it's not on his side." An older woman with a stylist's kit appeared as if conjured, introduced simply as Mariah. "Ms. Thompson," said Emerald, she said, eyeing Sarah's complexion with professional assessment. She was right. "This is going to sing on you." The next 30 minutes blurred. Her worn blazer and trousers disappeared, folded neatly and set aside. The emerald dress slid over her skin, cool and impossibly smooth, hugging at the waist and falling in a long, clean line to the floor with a slit that stopped just above her knee. Mariah tamed Sarah's curls, coaxing them into glossy waves that framed her face. Concealer chased away the shadows under her eyes. A soft red traced her mouth, making her look unfamiliar. Stronger. Like the version of herself she used to imagine when she was 16 and the world was still negotiable. When they were done, Sarah stood in front of the conference room's narrow mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. "You don't have to become someone else," Eleanor said quietly, watching her reflection over Sarah's shoulder. "You're simply letting the rest of them see who you always were." Sarah smoothed a hand down the dress, the emerald fabric whispering under her palm. For the first time in months, her shoulders weren't slumped forward, protecting her heart. They were back. "What about Emma?" she asked, voice steadying. "What happened to her?" "She has a trust within the trust," Eleanor replied. "Education, healthcare, a future that doesn't hinge on her father's whims. We'll go through the details later. Right now, the priority is making sure today's orders reflect reality, not his lies." Sarah nodded. "Ready?" Eleanor asked. No, she thought. Absolutely not. "Yes," she said. The limo waited at the curb, gleaming like an oil slick under the gray sky. When Eleanor and Sarah stepped out of the side entrance, the cluster of onlookers on the courthouse steps turned as one. For a heartbeat, the scene froze. Robert stood near the base of the stairs, mid-argument with his lawyer. Lisa hovered beside him, arms folded defensively. Both of them turned at the same time. Sarah watched the recognition move across Robert's face like a storm. First confusion, who is that, then disbelief, then something sharper, uglier, as his brain caught up. Lisa's mouth fell open. Is that, she started, but the rest evaporated. Sarah descended the steps slowly, Eleanor at her side. The emerald skirt floated around her ankles, the heels clicked a clean rhythm on the stone. Cameras flashed from somewhere, phones raised, a local news crew pivoting their lens. She didn't rush. For once, time seemed to be adjusting to her, not the other way around. When she reached the bottom, Eleanor handed her a slim leather folder. Inside, Sarah caught a glimpse of more documents, signatures, seals, the looping script of her grandmother's familiar hand on a letter that began, "My brave girl." Eleanor's voice carried clearly over the murmur of the crowd. "Your husband is not the only one who kept secrets, Mrs. Williams," she said. "Your grandmother built an empire, and she left it to the first woman in this family brave enough to leave a man who betrayed her." Robert flinched like he'd been slapped. His lawyer recovered first, stepping forward with a practiced sneer that didn't quite land. "This is inappropriate grandstanding," he snapped. "We're here for a simple divorce hearing, not a—" "Correction," Eleanor said smoothly. "You were here for a simple divorce hearing. Now you're here for a recalibration of facts." Lisa grabbed Robert's arm. "You didn't say anything about her having money," she hissed, just loud enough that Sarah caught it. "How the hell would I know?" Robert shot back, color rising in his neck. His eyes darted between Sarah, Eleanor, and the limo, calculating and coming up short. For once, Sarah didn't fill the silence with explanations or apologies. She simply held Robert's gaze, letting him see exactly what he'd misjudged. He blinked first. "Mrs. Williams," a clerk called from the doorway. "Courtroom 3 is ready for you." Sarah inhaled. The air felt different now, less like a sentence, more like a threshold. She turned toward the doors. Behind her, someone's footsteps faltered on the stone, hurried, then retreated. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Lisa pull her hand from Robert's arm and take a step back, then another, like distance alone could erase complicity. Robert reached for her, but she slipped from his grasp, heels clattering as she bolted up the steps, disappearing into the crowd. Sarah didn't watch her go. She walked forward, an emerald dress catching the light, Eleanor pacing at her side. The woman they had expected to shuffle in and accept crumbs had arrived with lawyers, leverage, and a legacy humming at her back. The courtroom doors swung open. Whatever else happened inside, one thing was already irrevocably true. The balance of power had just shifted, and it would never tilt the same way again. The courtroom doors swung shut behind Sarah with a heavy, padded thud that sounded like the end of one life and the beginning of another. For a second, everyone just stared. Rows of wooden benches were crammed with Monday morning misery, parents arguing in whispers, a teenager slumped beside a social worker, a couple in matching suits who refused to look at each other. The air smelled like paper and old coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. And then there was Sarah. Emerald dress, shoulders back, chin level. Eleanor at her side, serene as a queen taking her usual seat at court. The hush that followed them down the aisle was almost reverent. Robert was already at the petitioner's table. He half rose before he caught himself, as if his body wanted to stand up for her the way it used to and his pride remembered too late. His lawyer tugged at his sleeve, trying to pull his attention back to the stack of documents in front of them. Lisa sat in the row directly behind him, legs crossed, black dress molded to her like a second skin. Her makeup was immaculate, but her eyes were wrong, wide, a little too bright. Case number 14 to 392, Williams versus Williams, the bailiff called, voice booming. Petitioner, Robert Williams. Respondent, Sarah Williams. Sarah moved to the respondent's table, Eleanor motioning her toward a chair. Two other people were already there waiting, one woman, one man, both in dark, perfectly cut suits. Mrs. Williams, the woman said, offering a hand. Monica Hale. Lead counsel. And this is Jamal Ortiz, co-counsel. We'll do the talking today. The judge entered before Sarah could respond. Everyone rose. Judge Franklin was in his late 50s, hair thinning at the crown, expression permanently on the edge of bored. Family court had that effect on people. He settled behind the bench, shuffling through the morning docket. His eyes lifted, skimming first over Robert and his counsel, then Lisa, then Sarah and the growing army at her table. His gaze sharpened. "All right," he said slowly, voice echoing from the paneling. "Counsel, this is a dissolution of marriage with one minor child and no contested property per the initial filings. I trust we'll be able to resolve this quickly." Monica rose, smooth and unhurried. "Your Honor," the respondent respectfully contests that characterization. "We have new evidence bearing directly on the marital estate, child support, and potential criminal conduct." That woke him up. "Criminal conduct," Judge Franklin repeated. "In a family court dissolution hearing?" "Yes, Your Honor." Across the aisle, Robert's lawyer sprang to his feet. "Your Honor, this is grandstanding. My client has fully disclosed his financial position. Any suggestion otherwise is an ambush and a delay tactic." Monica didn't flinch. If opposing counsel is confident in his client's disclosures, he should have no objection to a brief review of our exhibits. The judge sighed but gestured. "Proceed, Ms. Hale. But be concise." "Of course." She nodded to Jamal, who wheeled a slim cart forward. Thick binders sat on it, neatly tabbed. A thumb drive glinted in his hand. Monica stepped into the well of the courtroom like she owned it. The first lie collapsed with a simple spreadsheet. "Exhibit A," she said, handing copies to the judge and opposing counsel. "Bank statements from Williams Financial Services operating account over the last 2 years. You'll note a series of transfers to an entity labeled MB Consulting." Judge Franklin adjusted his glasses. "Yes, I see them. Regular transfers. Significant amounts. Now compare those to Exhibit B." Another set of papers slid into place. A certified record from the Secretary of State. There is no registered entity named MB Consulting in this jurisdiction. However, there is an offshore holding corporation with the same initials in the Cayman Islands, opened the same month these transfers began. Robert's neck flushed an angry red. His lawyer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, this is business income. My client's firm often moves money for investment purposes. None of this is marital property." "Interesting," Monica said mildly. "Because Exhibit C, another packet, shows deposits from MB Consulting into a personal account ending in 4097. An account not listed in Mr. Williams's financial affidavit to this court. Robert's lawyer flipped pages faster, his composure thinning. Your Honor, we object to the characterization. On what basis? Judge Franklin asked. His bored tone was gone, replaced by a hard edge. This is outside the scope of today's hearing. This is directly relevant to child support and equitable distribution, Monica countered. Mr. Williams has claimed poverty to justify a $50 weekly obligation for his daughter. Yet he has been siphoning hundreds of thousands of dollars into undisclosed accounts. Robert leaned toward his lawyer, whispering sharply. The microphone caught the last part, creative tax planning, that's all. The judge heard it. His eyebrows rose. Mr. Williams, he said, you are under oath in all financial statements submitted to this court. If you have neglected to disclose assets, that is perjury. And if these transfers involve client funds, his gaze cooled. You may have bigger problems than your support obligation. The room rustled. Somewhere in the back, someone muttered, damn. Monica nodded to Jamal, who plugged the thumb drive into the courtroom monitor. Numbers bloomed on the screen, rows and columns, red and black. Hidden accounts, Monica said, tapping the chart with a pointer. Shell corporations. Transfers routed through entities that exist only on paper. These are not the patterns of honest business. Robert swallowed, Adam's apple bobbing. Your Honor, we again object, his lawyer tried. None of this has been authenticated. It has, Monica said crisply. By a forensic accountant retained by the Emerald Rebirth Trust. She gestured toward Eleanor. Ms. Thompson administers the trust established by the respondent's grandmother. The trust's investigators began monitoring Mr. Williams's financial activity 11 months ago, when certain red flags appeared. Red flags? The judge echoed. Routine gambling withdrawals disguised as business expenses. Sudden cash purchases. Airline tickets billed to clients that leads show were never used by those clients. Monica's tone stayed neutral, but every word landed like a stone. Shall I continue? Robert's lawyer sat down. If Robert had been hoping the spotlight would shift away from him, he was wrong. It moved to Lisa instead. Exhibit D, Monica said, sliding another folder out. Copies of signature cards for 3 of the undisclosed accounts. On the monitor, a scanned form appeared. At the bottom, in blue ink, was a loopy, confident signature. Ms. Lisa Barrett, Monica read aloud. Mr. Williams's friend. Lisa's head jerked up. What? Her voice cracked. Judge Franklin peered at the screen. Counsel, are you suggesting that Ms. Barrett is not merely a bystander? Monica said. These accounts list her home address as the mailing address. They include her phone number. The spending history, she clicked, and another screen appeared, full of boutiques and spas, luxury hotels and designer labels, matches her known activity. Lisa shot to her feet. I didn't open anything, she blurted. Robert said. She stopped, eyes darting to him. Robert's stare was lethal. Sit down, he hissed. Ms. Barrett, the judge said slowly, you are present in this courtroom as an observer. You may have just made yourself a witness. Lisa's lipstick seemed suddenly too bright, her dress too tight. The glamour of being the other woman melted under the fluorescent lights. I thought they were perks, she stammered. Company cards. He said clients put money there, and I didn't ask questions. Clearly, Monica said. Investigators from the trust would like very much to ask you some now. We have already notified the district attorney's office of our findings. They have, in turn, requested that Ms. Barrett not leave the building until she has spoken with them. A man in a dark suit by the door, one Sarah hadn't noticed before, stepped forward just enough to be noticeable. A badge flashed at his belt. Lisa's pulse visibly jumped in her neck. This is insane, she whispered. I didn't sign up for this. She backed toward the aisle, eyes darting to the exit. Ms. Barrett, the judge warned, leaving this courtroom against a direct request from law enforcement will not reflect well on you. She froze, breath coming fast. For the first time since Sarah learned about the affair, Lisa looked less like a rival and more like what she actually was, another person Robert had used up and put at risk. The house came next. Turning to the marital residence, Monica said. Opposing counsel has asserted that the property is Mr. Williams's separate asset, purchased with his income, and therefore not subject to division. That's correct, Robert's lawyer said quickly, seizing a safer topic. Title is in my client's name only. The respondent has no legal interest. Monica slid a single sheet of paper onto the document camera. Deed language filled the screen. I'm afraid that's inaccurate, she said. This is the original deed and mortgage agreement recorded 12 years ago. You'll note that the co-signer listed is one Ruth Ellis, respondent's grandmother. Robert's mouth fell open. That can't be right, he snapped. She didn't. I paid that mortgage. You made payments, Mr. Williams, Eleanor said for the first time, her voice calm and cool. Ruth supplied the down payment when the bank was hesitant to extend you credit. In exchange, she retained an interest in the property. That interest passed to the trust upon her death. And as of this morning, per the activation clause, the trust's interest, and therefore controlling ownership, now rests with Mrs. Williams. She said it gently, but the effect was tectonic. Sarah felt it in her bones. The house, the nursery she'd painted, the kitchen where she'd baked Emma's birthday cakes, the backyard where they'd strung fairy lights for summer barbecues, that house was no longer something she'd been forced to walk away from. It was hers. Judge Franklin sat back. Is that so? He murmured. It is, Monica confirmed. We are prepared to record updated title today, Your Honor. Effective immediately, Mr. Williams has no unilateral claim to sell, mortgage, or otherwise encumber the property. Robert's shoulders slumped as if someone had yanked a support beam from under him. For a moment, he looked less furious and more lost. Then the anger roared back. This is a setup, he spat. Some gold digger clause from a woman who never liked me. She's been dead for years. She can't just reach from the grave and steal my house. It was never just your house, Monica said. It was your family's. You chose to gamble that away. The final blow to Sarah's old reality came with the surveillance. Monica clicked again, and the monitor shifted from numbers and deeds to images. Grainy black and white, date stamps in the corners. Robert entering a hotel with Lisa at his arm. Robert sliding an envelope across a bar table to a man whose face stayed just out of frame. Robert at an ATM at 2 a.m., withdrawing thick stacks of cash, eyes darting around. These were captured by investigators retained by the Emerald Rebirth Trust, Monica explained. Once Mr. Williams's behavior suggested potential financial abuse, unexplained withdrawals, sudden secrecy, the trust authorized discreet monitoring. Their mandate was simple: if he remained a faithful partner and honest steward of marital assets, they would remain invisible. If not. Sarah watched herself indirectly enter the frame in one clip, walking Emma into daycare, Robert crossing paths with them but not looking up from his phone. The investigators' report timestamped the same day as a transfer to one of the hidden accounts. She'd thought she was alone in those months. Screaming into a pillow so Emma wouldn't hear. Counting the dwindling dollars in her checking account while Robert shrugged and said, "It's a rough quarter, babe." She hadn't been alone at all. "You knew," she whispered to Eleanor, eyes still on the screen. "All this time." "We suspected," Eleanor corrected gently. "We verified. And when you finally filed for divorce, you confirmed what Ruth feared would happen." Her gaze softened. "You were never crazy, Sarah. And you were never unprotected. You just didn't know the net was there until you jumped." The words lodged in Sarah's chest, heavy and healing at the same time. By then, the hearing had fully derailed. "This is no longer a simple dissolution," Judge Franklin declared, voice ringing. "Effective immediately, I am ordering a full forensic audit of Mr. Williams's personal and business finances. All accounts are frozen pending that review. Mr. Williams, you are not to transfer, hide, or in any way dispose of any assets. Do you understand?" Robert's face shone with sweat. "This is ridiculous, Your Honor. They're manipulating you. They show a few blurry photos and suddenly I'm a criminal? No one has called you a criminal in this courtroom, Mr. Williams," the judge said. "Yet." His lawyer tugged at his sleeve. "Robert, stop talking." Robert shook him off. "You don't get to ruin my life because my wife found a sugar grandma," he snapped, glaring at Sarah. "You want more money? Fine. We'll negotiate. But you don't drag my business through the mud." "Sit down, Mr. Williams," the judge barked. "One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt." Robert's lawyer exhaled, shoulders sagging. "Your Honor, given these developments, I respectfully move to withdraw as counsel pending clarification of my client's legal exposure. I'm not equipped to handle potential criminal allegations." The judge pinched the bridge of his nose. "Motion granted. Mr. Williams, you will need new representation before we reconvene." Robert stared at him. "You're just leaving?" The lawyer didn't answer. He simply gathered his briefcase and stepped away from the table, as if distancing himself from a fire. Sarah stayed silent. There was a power in it she hadn't expected. For years, she'd filled every gap, apologizing, smoothing over, explaining. Now she let the facts speak. Let Robert flail against a tide he'd created himself. The knock on the courtroom door came halfway through the judge's scheduling explanation. It opened to reveal the bailiff, flanked by a cluster of people who didn't look like they belonged in family court. An older couple, hands knotted together. A man in a work jacket with grease still under his nails. A woman in a nurse's uniform, eyes red-rimmed but fierce. Behind them, 3 attorneys in sharp suits. "Your Honor," the bailiff said, these individuals requested to be heard in the matter of Robert Williams. They were referred here by the district attorney's office. Judge Franklin frowned. This is highly irregular. One of the new lawyers stepped forward. Respectfully, Judge, once the trust's investigators turned over their findings, our clients realized Mr. Williams's accounts matched those used for their investments. He nodded toward the older couple. The Parkers entrusted their retirement savings to Williams Financial. The funds are gone. The room went very still. Another client spoke. He said it was a safe fund, the nurse said, voice shaking. Low risk. For my son's college. Now there's nothing there. The grease-stained man stepped up. He forged my signature on a withdrawal, he growled. Bank says I approved it. I didn't. Robert had gone pale, the sweat on his forehead now cold. This is not the venue for criminal complaints, Judge Franklin said firmly, but his gaze was tight. However, he looked at Robert, then at the victims, then back at the folders spread across his bench. It appears this matter will not remain in family court for long. He tapped his pen against the wood. I will forward all records and exhibits from today's hearing to the district attorney's office, he announced. Mr. Williams, you are hereby advised that anything you say from this point forward may be used against you in subsequent proceedings. As for the divorce, temporary orders will be entered granting Mrs. Williams exclusive use of the marital home, primary custody of the minor child, and interim support commensurate with the lifestyle you represented to the world rather than the poverty you claimed in this courtroom. He signed a stack of papers with quick, decisive strokes. Court is adjourned, he said. The gavel came down like a full stop. Outside, the gray morning had brightened, sun slanting off the courthouse steps. The air buzzed as if the building itself were gossiping. Cameras were waiting. Word had spread, first about the limo, then about the shouting from Courtroom 3, then about investigators and frozen assets and a lawyer walking out on his own client. Mrs. Williams, a reporter called as soon as Sarah appeared, lights from the camera rig throwing sharp angles across the stone. Is it true your husband hid millions from you? Did you know about the fraud? Who is the woman with you? Is that your attorney or your benefactor? Questions flew at her like thrown stones. For a heartbeat, old instinct surged, to duck, to apologize for taking up space. Eleanor touched her elbow, subtle and grounding. You don't owe them anything today, she murmured. Sarah met the nearest lens head-on. It reflected a distorted emerald shape back at her, like some stranger had taken her place. She didn't answer the questions. She didn't need to. She moved through the crush of microphones and outstretched hands, the crowd parting around her as though something in her presence insisted on it. Behind her, she heard Robert's voice, hoarse and frantic, arguing with someone, maybe the bailiff, maybe one of the detectives waiting to speak with him. Lisa's heels clicked unevenly on the stone, more hurried than glamorous. At the curb, the limo door opened. Sarah paused just long enough to glance back. Robert stood on the top step, tie askew, hair mussed, face a raw mix of anger and dawning fear. For the first time, he seemed to understand. The woman he'd expected to sign whatever was put in front of her now had lawyers, assets, and the sympathy of a courtroom he'd tried to manipulate. Their eyes met. He opened his mouth, some protest or plea forming, but she shook her head once, slow and certain, and stepped into the car. The door thudded shut on his words. As the limo pulled away from the curb, cameras flashing in its wake, Sarah exhaled a breath she felt like she'd been holding for years. Behind her, Robert's world was beginning to burn. Ahead, for the first time, the road belonged to her. The indictment came on a bright morning that felt almost disrespectfully cheerful. 6 weeks after the divorce hearing imploded, Sarah sat in the gallery of a different courtroom, criminal this time, wood darker, ceilings higher, the air sharper with the scent of consequence. Robert stood at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed in front of him. The suit that had once seemed welded to his skin was gone. Without it, he looked smaller. The arrogance was still there, but it sat uneasily on him, like a mask that no longer fit. State versus Robert Alexander Williams, the clerk read. Charges: securities fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. Robert shifted, jaw tight. When he glanced back and saw Sarah, something flickered across his face, shock first, then a flash of something like hope. He tried to catch her eye. She let her gaze drift past him to the prosecutor instead. "This is ridiculous," Robert told the judge when asked for his plea. "I'm being framed. These so-called investigators work for my ex-wife's trust. They have an agenda." "The state has an agenda, Mr. Williams," the prosecutor replied calmly. "It's called protecting the public." Lisa sat on the opposite side of the room, at a separate table with her own attorney. Gone were the tight dresses and high heels, she wore a plain blazer, hair pulled back, makeup muted. An ankle monitor peeked from under her slacks when she crossed her legs. When called to the stand, she walked with the careful steps of someone inching across thin ice. "Ms. Barrett," the prosecutor said, "did Mr. Williams ever tell you the source of the funds in the accounts you accessed?" "He said they were bonuses," Lisa answered, voice steady but soft. "Incentive pools. That clients agreed to it." "And did you believe him?" A pause. "I wanted to. But, when I asked to see the agreements, he always had a reason I couldn't. Confidentiality, timing, don't you trust me?" Her eyes darted briefly toward Sarah. "I told myself not knowing was safer." The prosecutor slid a stack of documents and photos onto the evidence table. "Let's talk about what you know now," he said. "Emails, burner phones, transactions. Walk the jury through this correspondence." Email threads appeared on a screen, messages from Robert to Lisa, from Robert to bankers, from burner accounts to clients. The words were clinical and damning: "Move it before quarter end. Client won't notice if we keep the statement clean. Use the other line, not my office phone." The clients testified next. Mrs. Parker, hands shaking as she described a retirement that evaporated overnight. The nurse whose son's college fund had been restructured into a zero balance. The mechanic who'd signed what he thought was a standard rollover and later discovered his signature on a withdrawal form he'd never seen. "I trusted him," the nurse choked out. "He sat in my kitchen and drank my coffee and told me he treated his clients like family." Sarah listened to every word. She didn't hide in the back. She sat where she could see the judge, the jury, the witnesses, and Robert's profile, stiff and furious as his carefully constructed narrative crumbled. Once, she would have felt responsible for all of it somehow, would have twisted the facts until she found a way to blame her own blind spots. Now, she saw it for what it was: his choices, his greed, his lies. She wasn't there as collateral damage. She was there as a witness to justice finally catching up. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury needed less than a day. On the morning of the verdict, the courtroom hummed with a strange, electric quiet. Reporters lined the back wall. The judge's clerk fidgeted with a stack of forms, readying the paperwork no one wanted but everyone was waiting for. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Franklin asked the foreperson. "We have, Your Honor." Robert stood, shoulders squared like a man bracing for a punch, still clinging to the belief that he could talk his way out if the blow wasn't fatal. "On the charge of securities fraud, how do you find the defendant?" "Guilty." "On the charge of wire fraud?" "Guilty." "On the charge of embezzlement?" "Guilty." "On the charge of tax evasion?" "Guilty." Each word landed with the dull weight of a stone dropped in water, ripples spreading outward. Lisa bowed her head, lips pressed tight. In the row behind Sarah, Mrs. Parker began to cry softly, not from pain this time, but something closer to relief. Robert's face drained of color. For the first time since she'd met him in that diner years ago, Sarah saw the absence of performance. No charming smile, no calculated contrition. Just raw, stunned disbelief. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. The courtroom was less crowded now, spectacle had given way to routine. But for the people whose lives he'd upended, this was the real moment. "Mr. Williams," the judge said, "you abused the trust of clients who relied on you to safeguard their futures. You lied to this court, to your wife, to the government. You chose shortcuts over integrity at every turn." He paused. "You are hereby sentenced to 12 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 8, contingent on restitution and good behavior." A murmur swept the room. Robert's hands tightened on the defense table. He turned then, as if pulled, searching the benches until he found Sarah. For a heartbeat, their gaze held. Rage simmered in his eyes, hot and hurting. Beneath it, though, she caught a flicker of something she hadn't expected: regret. Not enough to excuse anything. Just enough to make him human in the worst possible way. The bailiff moved to cuff him. Robert opened his mouth as if to say something, but the words died in his throat as they led him away. The heavy door closed behind him with a final, echoing click. The phone call came 2 days later. Sarah was at home, her home, sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of foundation proposals spread out in front of her. Emma was at a friend's house. Sunlight slanted across the tile, catching the edge of the ring box Eleanor had returned to her after the divorce was finalized. The landline rang. Almost no one used it, most people called her cell. She let it go to the second ring, then the third, unease crawling up her spine. "Ms. Williams," a recorded voice said when she picked up. "You have a call from an inmate at the Fulton County Correctional Facility. To accept." She closed her eyes for half a second, then pressed the number. A click, a brief hiss of static. "Sarah?" Robert's voice came through, thinner over the line but unmistakable. "Are you there?" She stared out the window at the backyard where Emma's swing set stood, bright and solid. "I'm here," she said. For a moment, he didn't speak. When he did, his tone was softer than she'd heard in years, stripped of courtroom bravado. "We were good once," he said quietly. "You remember that? Before all this?" She did. "The diner. The cheap champagne. The nights they'd fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted and hopeful. Memory was cruel that way, it didn't erase the sweetness just because bitterness came after. Yes, she said. We were. I messed up, he said. The words came out rushed, like he was afraid an admission might combust if it lingered. I know that. I got in too deep, and I kept thinking I could fix it if I just had a little more time, a little more money. But they're trying to bury me, Sarah. 12 years? His breath hitched. I won't survive that. She said nothing, letting the silence stretch. I know you have access now, he pushed on. Your grandmother's money, the trust, all those fancy lawyers. If you could just, he groped for the right word. Intervene. Talk to the DA. Offer restitution, show them I'm not a danger. You could get them to reduce the sentence. Do it for Emma if you won't do it for me. She doesn't deserve to visit her father in a prison jumpsuit for the next decade. The old reflex stirred, guilt, responsibility, the instinct to smooth everything over before it broke. It rose up like muscle memory, fix it. Save him. Keep the family intact, even if you disappear in the process. Sarah pressed her free hand against the table to steady herself. Please, Robert whispered. You're not a vindictive person. You don't leave people to drown. Images flashed through her mind like scenes from someone else's film. Lisa on her couch, laughing. Lisa's messages on his phone. The courthouse hallway, the $50 offer delivered with a smirk. Emma's small voice, is Daddy coming home after this? The way Robert had looked at her on the steps that day, certain she would fold because she always had before. She inhaled slowly. You're right, she said. I don't leave people to drown. Hope sparked in his tone. Then I offered you a life raft 100 times, she cut in, voice steady. Counseling. Honesty. A chance to stop before you crossed lines you couldn't uncross. You chose the water. Sarah. I won't use my freedom to rescue the man who tried to destroy it, she said. The line went very quiet. For a long moment, all she heard was his breathing on the other end, sharp and uneven. When he spoke again, the softness was gone. You think you're better than me now, he snapped. Because some dead woman left you money and lawyers. The call disconnected with a flat, decisive click. Sarah sat there, receiver still against her ear, as the dial tone pulsed. Then she set it down gently. Something loosened inside her chest, a knot she hadn't realized she was still carrying. The legal divorce had happened months ago. The emotional one happened in that kitchen, with a phone between them and a sentence she couldn't take back and didn't want to. For the first time since she'd signed her married name, she felt fully, completely free. Freedom, as it turned out, came with a purpose clause. The Emerald Rebirth Trust didn't exist to make its heir comfortable. It existed to crack open cages. Within months, the foundation was more than a stack of proposals on her kitchen table. It had an office downtown, high ceilings, battered wooden desks, walls lined with framed photos of women and families they'd helped. The sign on the frosted glass door read, The Emerald Rebirth Foundation. Legal aid, housing support, financial education. We can fund a full-time attorney for the shelter, Monica said one afternoon, circling numbers on a budget sheet. And 2 part-time financial counselors. Women walk out of court with protection orders and no idea how to access their own money. We can fix that. Eleanor watched from the doorway, arms folded, a faint smile tugging at her mouth. Your grandmother would be intolerably smug right now, she said. She always said you'd do something bigger than any house or bank account. Sarah laughed. You say that like you're not smug yourself. Oh, I am, Eleanor admitted. But this is your show now, Sarah. I was the bridge. You're the destination. Bit by bit, Eleanor stepped back. She still attended board meetings, still offered counsel when asked, but the day-to-day decisions shifted onto Sarah's shoulders. She found she could carry them. She met women whose stories echoed her own, bank accounts drained, credit ruined by partners, dreams deferred until they were barely whispers. She listened, remembered what it felt like to sit on that courthouse bench believing she was worth exactly $50 a week, and built programs she wished had existed then. Free legal clinics on Saturdays. Emergency grants for hotel rooms or first month's rent. Workshops where volunteers explained interest rates and credit scores and how to read a paycheck stub without shame. Every time a woman walked out of their office with a plan instead of just panic, the world tilted a little bit closer to right. Lisa's name came up again almost a year after sentencing. Probation and a mountain of community service, Monica reported, flipping through her phone. Testifying against him helped. So did the evidence that he forged some of her signatures. The judge decided she'd been stupid and selfish, not malicious. Stupid and selfish can still wreck people, Sarah said, but the words lacked heat. A week later, a receptionist buzzed her. There's someone here to see you. She says you know her. Lisa Barrett? Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Send her up. Lisa stood in the doorway of Sarah's office a minute later, twisting a set of car keys in her hand. She looked smaller, somehow. Not physically, just less inflated. The makeup was lighter, the clothes less like a costume. I'm not here for forgiveness, Lisa said before Sarah could speak. You don't owe me that. I did what I did. I knew enough to walk away and I didn't. Sarah nodded slowly. Then why are you here? Because Robert still blames you, Lisa said. Not just for the divorce. For everything. The indictment, the sentence, the clients, me flipping. In his head, none of it is his fault. It's yours. And if he ever gets out, she trailed off, shrugging. Men like him need a target. I thought you should know. Once, that would have sent a chill through Sarah's veins. Now, it landed and went nowhere. Thank you, she said. I'm not afraid of him anymore. Lisa studied her, something like respect in her eyes. Yeah, she said eventually. I can see that. She turned to leave, then glanced back. For what it's worth, she added, that day you stepped out of the limo. I realized he'd never been the prize. You were. Sarah didn't answer. She didn't need to. The fundraiser was held in a ballroom that glittered with soft light and expectation. Cameras lined the back wall. Sponsors sat at round tables draped in ivory linens, the centerpieces explosions of flowers and emerald green accents. At the front, a wide stage held a podium and, behind it, a massive screen displaying the Foundation's logo, a stylized R and E intertwined in a laurel wreath, stars scattered behind them. Sarah stood in the wings, smoothing her hand over the skirt of her gown. Emerald again, this time in a fitted dress paired with a sharp jacket, the fabric catching the light with every breath. 10 minutes, a stage manager whispered. Then you're up. In the front row, she could see Emma, now 8, in a green dress that matched her own, legs swinging under her chair. Next to her sat Eleanor, regal as ever, and Monica, already scrolling through notes for her own remarks. When they introduced her, the founder and driving force behind the Emerald Rebirth Foundation, Sarah Williams, the applause rolled like a warm tide. She walked to the center of the stage, the lights bright but not blinding. For a moment, she just looked at them, donors, survivors, volunteers, strangers who had decided her story meant something beyond gossip. "Good evening," she began, voice steady. "A year and a half ago, I thought my life was over." She told them about the bench outside family court. The sandpaper feel of divorce papers in her hands. The $50 offer that tried to price her daughter's worth. The humiliation of watching her husband and his mistress laugh 5 feet away while she tried not to fall apart. She didn't linger there. She moved to the turning point. And then, she said, a limousine pulled up to the curb. The audience leaned in. She described Eleanor's arrival, the emerald dress, the knowledge of a legacy built in secret by a woman who decided betrayal would trigger not shame, but power. The limo was dramatic, she said, smiling slightly. I won't lie. It felt good to step out of something that didn't scream defeated. But that's not why we're here tonight. Because the truth is, you don't need a limousine to change the story of your life. Images flashed on the screen behind her as she spoke, courtroom sketches, stock photos of hands signing documents, then shots from the Foundation's work, women sitting with attorneys, kids playing in safe housing, a workshop where a volunteer pointed at a screen covered in budgeting numbers while attendees nodded and took notes. What changed that day wasn't my bank balance, Sarah said. It was my understanding of my own worth. For years, I believed I had to accept whatever I was given, emotionally, financially, legally, because I didn't have the right letters after my name or enough zeros in my account. I thought survival was the best I could hope for. She paused, letting the silence wrap around her words. Ruth Ellis, my grandmother, disagreed. She believed women deserve more than survival. She believed betrayal shouldn't be the end of our story, but the catalyst for a different one. Her gaze found Emma's in the front row. Her daughter's eyes shone, small hands folded on her lap. So we built this foundation, Sarah went on. To make sure no woman has to choose between staying with someone who is destroying her and stepping into an unknown with nothing. To make sure no one signs away their future for $50 a week because they think there's no alternative. She talked about the legal cases they'd won, the apartments they'd helped secure, the accounts they'd unraveled so women could see where their money had gone. She spoke of the partners in the room, the hours volunteers had poured into making spreadsheets understandable and courtrooms less terrifying. And I stand here tonight, she finished, not as a victim of a cheating husband or a crooked financial planner, but as proof that the story doesn't end there. It can start there, if we decide it does. The applause rose, loud and sustained. As it washed over her, Sarah felt something settle into place, not a crown, not a role she'd been handed, but a self she'd grown into. She glanced once more at Emma. Her daughter beamed up at her, eyes bright, dimples showing, pride radiating from her small frame like its own kind of spotlight. Sarah smiled back, then looked out over the room, at the women whose names she knew, at the strangers whose lives might intersect with the Foundation's work in ways none of them could predict yet. That day at the courthouse, she said softly, leaning into the microphone for her final line, I didn't just arrive in a limo. I arrived as the woman I was always meant to become. If this story caught your attention, subscribe and join us for the next story.